Are you filming me now? My name is Michael Jenna. So I started out at about 15 or 16 in a band called Nasty Habits with a bunch of guys that were way older, and we were playing clubs in Manhattan. Life was awesome. A 15-year-old kid playing on stage in front of 25-year-old girls and drinking and partying.
You know, he was one of us. We had a great group of friends, lived in this great little neighborhood called Middle Village, Queens, where everyone knew everyone. And you know, Mike got into his share of trouble every now and then. Nothing really serious. We all did.
Me and my wild days. Hard to tell. Can you see the difference? See the similarity? Big, teased out hair with a ton of hairspray, eyeliner, lipstick, leopard print shirts, leather pants, thigh-high leather spiked boots. Just a wild man. There was no responsibilities. I rarely had jobs. All I did was drink, do drugs, play music, meet women. It was a lot of fun. That was my whole life. I mean, there was a time when, like, I'd have a place to stay, but I had this van, and I would travel around. I'd play in 4 or 5 different bands at once, just because that was my life, was music and drugs. And it reached a point when drugs really became more important than the music. When I was 21, I was in a band called Lace in New York, and the singer was my very, very closest friend I've ever had in my life. And I walked in his house and found him dead of a heroin overdose. At that time in New York City, heroin was pretty big. Different types of downer pills were pretty big. And they tried to keep me protected from that stuff, the guys I was in a band with at that time, but eventually the drugs and that crowd pulled me into it, and I started doing heavier drugs even at a really early age. It started out like Valium or Quaaludes, and I would drink hard liquor and beer, but eventually I found my way to cocaine, which was my first drug of choice, my first true love. Before any woman or anything else, it was cocaine. Once I got introduced to cocaine, my life became extremely unmanageable, almost immediately.
Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward circuitry. It's characterized by an inability to abstain from using substances, craving for substances, and impairment in behavioral control.
Eventually turned to stealing from my parents, stealing from my brothers, stealing from my friends, or lying. Whatever I had to do to get more, that became as much of a part of my life as music. We were all doing it together, and it was fun. And what I found was a lot of the guys would stop at a certain point and go home or go to sleep, but I couldn't stop. I'd keep going until there was no way to keep going.
Oftentimes people have a susceptibility to developing addiction. Once you're exposed to a substance, that reward is exacerbated.
I guess after a few years, I did see Mike back in the neighborhood. And when I saw him, his physical appearance had changed, and I knew from his physical appearance that something wasn't right. I wasn't quite sure what he was dealing with, but I knew that he was dealing with something, and it didn't look good at the time.
I'd get kicked out of my house all the time. I'd end up living at people's houses, living off people because they didn't want to get a job. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I knew I couldn't stop. I wanted to stop, and I can't explain it. I was just powerless.
It becomes the primary important aspect of someone's life. So they lose interest in their family, their friends, food, work, important relationships, and they pursue that substance.
I weighed 108 pounds. I would be up for days without sleeping. I wouldn't shower. My house was filthy. My clothes were filthy. I had no friends. It was just horrible. It was just a terrible way to live. I couldn't get a place to spend the night. And I wouldn't tell anybody I was homeless. I'd try to meet a girl to get me a place to stay or something. But if it didn't work, I'd go down to a subway and sleep on a train. My music career was over. The party was over. I was very depressed because I didn't have my crazy rock and roll life, and just started doing cocaine in the form of crack and drinking out of control, and doing heroin too, whenever I could get my hands on it. And that's when my whole life became about drugs and nothing else. December 31st, 1998, A friend and I were driving back from Gettysburg with enough drugs to go to the jail for a very, very long time. And a police officer made a U-turn right behind me and put his lights on. And I just sat up and I just prayed. I said, God, if I get out of this, I'll stop. And the cop pulled next to us and drove off in front of us and took off. And I had to stop. And I was like, did that really just happen? And I just said, you know, this has to stop. I'm going to go to jail. And 8 days later, I went to treatment.
The first step to treatment would be to admit to yourself that you may have a substance use disorder.
I called Cumberland County's Drug and Alcohol Commission, and I told them I needed help. And they said we could get you into a rehab. They taught me that my brain chemistry had changed. I have a disease. I'm powerless once I use. And the only way I could have some form of control is if I don't pick up and don't use.
It's a brain disease. It's not a character defect.
So I got out of treatment and used on and off over an 8-month period. I finally got clean and never used again as of August 10th, 1999. I started college in January 2012. I went to Albright College. I majored in applied psychology, organizational behavior, and I graduated in May of 2016. I'm pretty damn proud of that, man. I work in a rehab for men that are on state parole that have tested positive in a drug test with their parole agent, and their parole agent doesn't send them to jail, they'll send them to our rehab. And basically, the therapy comes from the community. The community is the healer. The counselors, we just drive. We just say, go this way and go that way. I'm proud of myself. I'm really happy to be where I am today. And had I not gone to treatment, had I not gone to meetings, I wouldn't be where I am.